Hello everyone, this is Raza Dorani, Microsoft Business Applications MVP. In this video, we're going to focus on responsive design for Canvas apps. We will look at how you can enable responsiveness in a Canvas app, the different properties that you need to be aware of, and we will look at 2 tips on creating responsive galleries as well as responsive form controls. So let's go ahead and get started with this video right away. By responsive design, what we mean is that the app can adapt and deliver the best experience to your users, no matter where your users are accessing the app from a desktop, from a laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone. The Maker portal itself is an example of responsive design. If the width of this web page shrinks, as you can see, all the elements on the DOM for this web page are responsive. They are changing their behavior depending upon the width and depending upon the height that is available, and that's why it's known as responsive design. Now, let's go ahead and create a Canvas app from blank. First important takeaway here is that Canvas apps are not responsive by design. And that's the reason why the first question you get asked when you are building your Canvas app is whether you're building it for a phone format or for a tablet format. I'm going to pick the phone format and I'm going to create my app. And this will go ahead and build my app with the mobile form factor. And I will go ahead and pick a theme. In this case, I'll pick the lavender theme. And let's say I go ahead and just add a very simple header to my app. And I will go ahead and save this app. Now, if I play this app in the web browser, observe how the app is not responsive by design. The app is still adhering to the mobile form factor because that's the form factor that I picked when designing my app. If I had picked the tablet experience, the width would have been larger. So how do I enable responsiveness in my app? If you go to File and Settings, and if you go to Screen Size plus Orientation, the first thing you need to do is you need to turn off the Scale to Fit option. And when you turn this off, it will automatically also remove the Lock Aspect Ratio feature. You can also decide whether or not you want to lock the orientation of this app. In this case, I'm just going to turn it off and click on Apply. Once I make the change, if I play the app within the edit experience of the app, you will notice that it will not automatically show me the responsive behavior. And the reason is because in order for you to test the responsiveness, you have to go ahead and save and publish your app. So in order for you to test responsiveness, the only way you can test it is by publishing your app and then testing it. Back in my browser experience for my published app, this time if you observe, I have played the app and the app is now responsive, because if you notice, the background color is spreading across the width and height of the availability of my browser size. Now the next thing that we need to understand is what are the different features that I can leverage to actually build responsive apps. Now I will go ahead and insert a label right here. Every control in PowerApps has these 4 properties, which is the x-axis, y-axis, width, and height properties that will drive the responsiveness of the elements in your app. So in this case, I just added a label. Let's observe these 4 properties first. If I go to the x-axis, this shows me the position from which this label begins on the x-axis. Right now it's beginning from 0, that's why it's starting from the leftmost position. If I change this to, let's say, 50, you will notice how this label moves 50 pixels to the right. Now if I select this label and if I move this label across my screen as I move the x-axis, notice how the x-axis is being dynamically calculated for me. Same scenario is with the y-axis. So as I move this up and down, notice how the y-axis changes. So the y-axis and x-axis change as I change the position of my label. The other 2 properties are the width and height. As I increase the width, notice how the width changes. So if I increase this width is changed to 640. If I go to the height property, the height property right now is 78. If I increase the height, notice how the height property also changes. So these are the 4 main properties that you need to focus on: the X, the Y, the width, and the height. For this label property, I'm going to go ahead and leverage the text property, and I'm going to change this with app width and app.width. So the app's width property corresponds to the dimensions of the current width that your device or browser window is showcasing or running under right now. So in my case, I'm playing this in edit mode, so it's 640. it's showing me as 640. Now, how did this number 640 come about? If I go back to File and go to Settings, if I go to Screen Size and Orientation, notice in this case, the design width, that is the base design for my app, I picked the mobile experience and I have picked the orientation as portrait. So the width is 640 and note that's the design width, and the design height is 1136. Now, if I go ahead and add, so I'm going to add character 10. Now, what's character 10? It's a new line character in PowerApps. So if you need new line, use character 10. And I'm going to add right here another property that I want to showcase, and this one is app.height. And this time I'm going to use app.height. Now, if you look at the height property for the label, this one set at 64. I'm going to set this to auto height, so I see automatically it adjusts the height depending upon the height available. In this case, it shows me the height, which is 1136. Now, app.height and app.width, both of these properties are going to give you the actual height and width of the current browser setting or the mobile setting that the user is viewing the app on. I'm going to go ahead and add two more properties right here, known as app.designWidth and app.designHeight. Now, in this case, notice the design width and the design height are the actual dimensions that you used to create your app, and those will never change because that's the base dimensions that you've set your app for. Now, let's understand all of these values when I actually go ahead and publish this app and try and play this out in a browser. So the next step now for me is to go ahead and go to File, Save, and Publish. Remember, I have to publish the app if I want to test the responsiveness. Now, back in my browser window for my app, my published app, notice that the app.width and the app.height have now changed. That's because I'm viewing this on a browser, and the browser width and height is identified and placed out right here. Now, if I resize my browser window, observe as I change the width how the app.width value changes. Right? See how app.width changes. And if I change the height, you will notice that the app.height value is changing, but the design width and the design height of my app do not change. That's because those were the dimensions that I selected for designing my app initially. I picked the mobile form factor. Now, if you notice right here, the header label right here is not expanding through the width of my app. It's not responsive. My header label is not responsive because it has a hard-coded width that I have defined. These two properties, the app.width and the app.height, are going to be crucial for me to leverage in order for me to build a responsive app. So back in my PowerApps, if I pick my header label and if I observe the width property, it's hard-coded to 640. That's because when I set the width of the label, I just manually moved it across and it got set to 640. Now, if you look at the home screen, if you look at the screen also has a width property, and observe the width property is maximum. There's a function called max, app.width and app.designWidth. Now, what does this mean? It means whatever is the current width of the device that the user is viewing the app on, get that value, that's app.width, and get the design width, which is the minimum width for which I have designed this app. And in my case, because I picked the mobile form factor at 640, that means no matter what happens, 640 is going to be the minimum width that the screen is going to be set for. And as the width increases beyond 640, it's going to pick that value and set it as the width for my screen. Right? So there's a formula right here which says get me the maximum value either from the width of the app or the design width of the app. The same formula also applies for the height property of this app. And that's the reason why, if you look at the responsive behavior right here, if you look at the background of this app, this creamish background that this app has, notice even if I change the width or if I change the height, it is responsive. And the reason is because of this formula that has been put in place, right? And this screen has a fill property, and that fill property is this color, which is the creamish color that is being applied right here to my app. Now, how do I make this label responsive? Now, instead of using the width, I can actually go ahead and grab the same formula that's available right here. So if I look at the width property right here, I can copy this and paste it right here on the width property as well. But if I placed this right here, it's going to work, but there's calculations here, right? Get me the max value. It's a lot of work that it has to do every time for every control if I want to set the width to be the actual width of my app. Now this has already been calculated on the screen control. Now, how do I leverage this? Any control that you add to your screen can reference to the screen by using a property called parent. So right here, I can change this to parent. That means get me the parent dot width, get me the width of the parent. Now, what is the parent for this label control is the screen. What's the width? The width has already been designed to be responsive. That means now, because I have changed this formula to parent dot width, it is going to relate to the width of my home screen. That's it. One very important thing to note, if I go and just change this, if I just try and resize this, if I move this, notice that formula is gone. So it's extremely important not to go ahead and change these properties manually. So you got to go to the formula and set it. So once again, with property, parent, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for this label control as well, because if you observe, this label is also sitting on the left hand side. One thing what I can do is I can select this label and once again go to the width property and set this as parent.width. So it's going to take the entire width that's available. And I also want to center align my text, so I can just go to the home tab right here and pick the center value for the align property. I will go ahead and once again, to test it, save and publish. Now this time if I open my app in the browser, notice how the width of the label is spanning the width of the screen, and also the other label that I added, which is showcasing all these properties, is also center aligned and it's utilizing the entire width of the screen. As I shrink the width, observe how everything is responsive and it is changing based on the width that's available in my screen. And I can do the same thing for the height property as well. Now let's go ahead and check this on a mobile device. The app.width, the app.height, and the minimum dimensions for the app that I have set it for. I also made sure that my orientation of my app is not locked. So if I turn my mobile device around, observe how the app itself is responsive in nature. That we've seen what these four properties do, right? The app.width, height, design width, and design height. Let's also understand some other important properties that you need to be aware of in order for you to truly build and design responsive apps. In my case, I've gone ahead and updated the formula. And in this case, I have also added some additional important attributes that you need to be aware of. Now, one property that's available on the screen is known as size. Now, for this label, if I select parent, that's my screen, dot size, this will give me a numeric value, which will tell me the size of my screen. Now, this numeric value will either be 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending upon the type of the device. So remember, you don't have to calculate the height, width, dimensions every time. You don't want to get into that calculation business. And that's the reason why we have the screen size property that will let you know what kind of device the user is on. If this number is 1, in this case it's 1, that means the device is a phone. The device type is related to a phone. And in my case, when I was designing this app, I was designing this app for a mobile phone factor, and that's the reason why the screen size is 1. When it is 2, it means it's a tablet device that's held vertically. When it's 3, it's a tablet device that's held horizontally. And if it is 4, that means it's on a desktop computer. So it depends upon some calculation related to something known as size breakpoints. Now, what are size breakpoints? If you look at the app object, and if I go to advanced, there's something known as size breakpoints right here. And it comes with the default dimension set for a mobile form factor, that is 1200, 1800, and 2400. And this relates to the width of your screen. So if the screen width is anything less than 1200, the size is going to be returned as 1. If it is between 1200 and 1800, it will be 2. Between 1800 and 2400, that's your tablet device held horizontally, that's 3. And anything greater than 2400, it's the desktop computer experience, that is 4. Now, size breakpoints is an array. So if I want to show the value of this, if you look at the formula that I've applied here, I'm using app.size breakpoints. That's going to give me this array, and this is a customizable array. You can add more breakpoints and you can add more dimensions to your app. In my case, I've just selected app.breakpoints and I'm using parent.size. Now parent.size tells me what's the size of my app, right? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? Phone, tablet vertical, tablet horizontal, or desktop? I am going ahead and from this array, depending upon the size, which is 1, 2, 3, or 4, I'm going to fetch all the attributes. And then I am picking out the last value. This basically tells me what's the current breakpoint size associated with that 1, 2, 3, 4 screen size attribute. Now let's go ahead and save and publish this app. Observe out here that the screen size right now is 4, and the reason is because I am on a web browser and the breakpoint size is showing as 2400. That's because the width of the screen has gone beyond the 2400 number, which is true, right? My app width right now is 3839. Now, as I change the width of my app, observe how the screen size now changes to 3, that because it's less than 2400, right? I'm going to keep scrolling in. Observe the screen size. Now it changes to 2, and when it goes to a mobile device experience, it changes to 1. So I don't have to create some sort of complex formula that tells me what kind of device the user is on, because I can leverage the screen size attribute to get that value for me. Now let's play the same thing on the mobile device. Here is the app in action. Screen size is showing as 1 because I'm on my mobile device. If I change the orientation of my device, notice how the screen size this time changed to 2 because I'm holding my mobile device in the landscape mode. If I change this back and hold this vertically, notice how the screen size now changes to 1. So I can leverage the screen size attribute to build responsive apps. Now that we've understood what all these properties signify, let's go ahead and try and create certain use cases around responsiveness. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and design responsiveness around a gallery control, the most commonly used control. Now in my app, I have a couple of Excel tables that I have imported for devices and manufacturers. That's my data source. I will go ahead and create another screen. Now let's go ahead and insert a gallery control right here. In my case, I'm going to pick the vertical gallery, all right? And in this case, I will go ahead and pick the manufacturers. Now, once again, let's look at the width property. Everything is dependent on those 4 attributes, right? Height, width, X, Y. Let's first focus on the width. The width is hard-coded. That means it is not going to be responsive. So what do I need to do? Change this. Change this to what? Parent dot width. Now let's figure out the height. Now notice the height is 575, hard-coded of course, and I can change the height, and typically we end up doing something like this, but this is not going to work because if someone is viewing this on a screen where the height is more than the given height, it is not going to be responsive. So how do I set the responsiveness of the height? Well, one thing I could do is use parent.height, and this will pick the full height of the app, which is fine because if I want to place this gallery throughout this app, I'm good. But I also have this label control right here, which is the header, and I'm going to call this LBL header gallery. Now, if I want to subtract this height, all I have to do is minus LBL header gallery dot height. That's it. And now this will sit perfectly right here. Now, how does the user come to this screen? Well, on my home screen, I can go ahead and insert a button. Now remember, we are trying to create a responsive experience. That means any control that I add to my app has to be built responsively. So just by throwing in a button control, it's not going to be responsive by design. So how do I get around this one? First thing, I'm going to call this galleries. So this button text is called gallery. And when the user selects this, we will navigate to my gallery screen. The width of this is set to 280, which is fine. I want to set this to 280. Now, how do I ensure that this is sitting in the center of this screen? Remember, it needs to be responsive. I want to set this button exactly to be at the center of my screen and also below this particular label. Now, if I copy the reference to this label, if I look at the Y property of this gallery control, it's 573. It's hard-coded, of course. And if I move it, it's going to change. But I want to set this to be relative to this label. All I have to do is do label.height, the height of that label, plus the Y property of that label. And if I want to add some additional spacing, I can add that. So it's going to sit exactly 10 pixels below this label, no matter what the height of this label is. But what about the X property? It's hard coded to 180. I would like this button to be sitting exactly at the center. Well, remember, you got to go for the parent. So parent.width. This is going to throw it out of the screen. Why? Because the width of the parent is the entire width of the screen. So I've got the parent.width. I can divide this by 2, but notice it's still not sitting in the center. And the reason is because I need to also remove the width of this control itself. So I'm going to do self.width, and the whole thing is going to be divided by 2. A little bit of maths. Parent.width minus self.width. So whatever is the width of the parent, subtract the width of this button, no matter what the width is, and then divide it by 2, and it sits exactly at the center. Okay, so I'm done with this, and if I need to test it, save, publish. So as you can see, my button is sitting right here below this label, and it is center aligned. And the reason why it is center aligned and why is it responsive as I move the width or change the width, it's still center aligned, is because of the formula that I plugged in. Now if I click on gallery, this will take me to the responsive gallery that I designed. And now observe that the gallery itself is utilizing the full width, right? And it is showing me all the values that are available. Now a gallery has a property known as wrap count, and this is a number that you can provide. Right now it's 1. If I change this to 2, it will show 2 items. If I change this to 3, it will try and squeeze in 3 items, and so forth. Now what if I want to dynamically define this wrap count based on the amount of width that's available? In fact, let's utilize that key feature that I spoke about earlier, that key property called the size property of my screen. Wrap count, I can just pick parent. What's the parent of this gallery? It's the screen. Parent.size. Now since screen size is going to give me a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4, depending upon what device is this app being viewed on. Now observe how the gallery is showing me 4 items because it's wrapping by 4. The reason is because if I head back, what's the screen size? It's 4. Now if I change the screen size, let's say the width now becomes 3. This is like a tablet device that's held horizontally. If I go to the gallery, observe how the gallery is now showing 3 items. It's responsive. Notice as I squeeze this in, it's now changing to 2. If I squeeze this in and go to the mobile experience, it changes this to 1. Let's take another use case. This time, let's take a use case of a form control, a very common use case. Now in the form screen, I'm going to go ahead and add my form control. In this case, I'm going to pick a simple list in SharePoint. Now the form control has something known as snap to columns, and this automatically snaps your columns to the number of columns that you have defined. The number of data cards will be snapped to the number of columns that you have defined. In my case, it's 1, so I see all of them in a 1 column format. If I change this to 2, it will try and squeeze it in a 2 column format, and so forth. I can even decide the layout. By default, it's vertical. You can change this to horizontal, so the text and the control will be shown next to each other. In this case, I'm going to pick my vertical layout. And of course, snap to columns 2 does not look good on a mobile device. If I change this to 1, it will look good on a mobile device. Probably 2 looks good on a tablet device held vertically, 3 looks good on the tablet device held horizontally, and maybe 4 controls side by side look good on my desktop computer. How do I go ahead and set the columns to that property? The maximum number of columns that I want to set is 4. So I've gone ahead and set this to 4. Now it doesn't look good on a mobile device, but how do I make this responsive? Well, for this, a little bit of a trick. Trick number 1, you need to ensure that all these data cards have a property known as width. And notice this width is calculated depending upon the available width and depending upon the number of snap to columns that you've specified. Now, rather than using this hard-coded value, what I would like to do is go ahead and change this with the parent.width. That means whatever is the width of that the parent has, and in this case, it's the entire width of the screen, but divide this by the size of the screen. For parent.size, notice I don't find the size property, and the reason is because the data card in action, which is right here as the title data card, the parent for this is the form control. Now, if you look at the width of the form control, it's hard-coded to 640. So first of all, I do not need a hard-coded value. So I'm going to change this to parent.width. That means my form now is going ahead and referencing to the width of my screen, which is right. Whereas my data card, when I say parent.width, it's actually relating to the form. Now, how do I get the size of my screen, which gives me the 1, 2, 3, 4 values, the phone, tablet, vertical, horizontal, desktop values? How do I get those right here? In order for me to get that, instead of using parent.size, what you can do is replace this with app.activeScreen. This tells you what screen is currently active in the app, dot size. This will now give me the size. Now, please note, in this case, I am in a phone form factor in the design mode of my app. So the size is going to come back as 1. Let's say I was viewing this on a tablet device held vertically, the number is 2, so it will divide the width by 2. That means it will have more real estate to fit 2 cards, and so forth. Now I have got this for the width of 1 data card. I need to apply this for all the data cards that are available in my form. One way of doing this is by selecting it, going to width, and setting this for every data card. What if I have 40 cards? It's a lot of work. So here's a trick. Select a data card, hold the control key, select a second data card. Sometimes it doesn't select both. Keep holding the control key and then select it again. Okay, so as you can see, I've got 2 data cards selected by holding the control key. The moment you do this, you can go ahead and hold the control key and start clicking all the other ones as well. But here's another faster way. Once you have 2 of the data cards selected, if you do Control A, it will automatically go ahead and select all the data cards for you. That's exactly what I want. I just need the cards. Once I have this, I can now set the width property to the formula that I defined earlier. And that's all I have to do to make this form behave in a responsive manner. The next thing what I want to do is provide the user with the submit button so they can submit the form. The x-axis, want it to be in the center, it's going to be the same formula. So my submit button is going to sit right here in the center. Let's go ahead, save, publish. One final thing that I have to do is whenever the user comes to this screen, so on visible of this screen, I will go ahead and trigger a new form object, and just going to call this form. That means whenever the user comes to this screen, it creates the new form. Perfect. Let's go ahead, save this, publish this, and once I refresh my browser window, go back to form, here's my form. Now observe I am on the desktop experience. That's why it's showing me in the 4-column format. Observe as I reduce the width of my browser, how the entire form is responsive. So you can build responsive forms as well by just plugging in that one simple formula for all the data cards. You can also make the submit button sitting right below this right here by calculating the height of this form dynamically and setting it right below this. So this is how you can leverage the different properties: app.width, app height, design width, design height, size of the screen, which tells you what kind of device the user is on, and also define your own custom breakpoint sizes if you wish, and go ahead and start building truly responsive apps. So this is part 1 of my responsive video series. Please go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.